Oh man, my goodness gracious. Hopefully this audio is better. Yeah, having some technical difficulties a little bit earlier with the audio. Definitely something wrong with there with the playback. I told myself I would definitely start on time today. I told myself I'd absolutely start on time at 10 o'clock. And of course, I started 15 minutes late because of the audio issues. What is up at Suburban Catholic? To anyone who tuned in 15 minutes ago, I hope the audio sounds better now. Definitely having a little bit of technical difficulties with the setup. If the audio is messed up again, definitely let me know. I'd really appreciate the feedback. But hopefully we're ready to rock and roll here. The second go around. So yeah, like I said, after a little bit of a 1 week hiatus, ready to talk about Breaking Bad season one once again. And like I tried to talk a little bit about when I first started the stream. When you rewatch this show, as I said a little bit earlier, in my mind, there's just no way to get around and circumvent all of the Better Call Saul parallels and references that you now see when you rewatch this show for the 20th time, as I've been doing. And yeah, just as I'm watching this scene here, the very first cold opening scene, there's a ton of Better Call Saul references to the story that was crafted over the course of season 5 of Better Call Saul. We also see a very cool reference with the character Ken, who appears in season 2 of Better Call Saul, who appears for the very first time and only time in this episode in season 1 of Breaking Bad. And at the same time, we also sort of have the Better Call Saul overlap in the character Combo now, who appears for the very first time in this episode as well. And we get to learn more about his backstory that was originally presented to us in the season 3 finale of Breaking Bad, that at the same time was delved into and displayed to us in season 6, excuse me, of Better Call Saul in the episode entitled Waterworks. So yeah, just like I said, whenever I watch this show, again, now all I really think about is the Better Call Saul parallels. Maybe it's different for someone else who's also watching the show for the second, third, fourth time, but yeah, it's definitely how I sort of view the show these days. And yeah, even this very first scene here with Hank Schrader going over Operation Icebreaker with the rest of the DEA, and of course, I mean, where do I start here? As I said, the Crazy Eight parallel is immediate when we first see this scene here at the very beginning of this episode, and yeah, we learn the entire backstory of Crazy Eight's character in the plot of Better Call Saul, but the sort of open-ended nature and the little bit of the backstory that was presented to us here in this opening scene was finally put together at the as the story of Better Call Saul was written. What is up at Henry Lemoyne? Cool name for sure. What is up? But yeah, so again, a little bit of the backstory here. I talked about it in a couple of the previous reviews I did for season 1 of Breaking Bad. What is up, reads, and I really like how they finally got to put the story together of Crazy Eight, based on the open-ended nature of it that was presented to us in season 1 of Breaking Bad, where I was always confused about why, yeah, at full hay for sure, I was always confused why Crazy Eight would rat out his own cousin. Why? Well, again, we still don't really know why he ratted out his own cousin and why Emilio couldn't work for the cartel when his cousin Domingo was working for the cartel. That's kind of an open-ended aspect of the story that we never got to see. But yeah, it's kind of cool when Steve Gomez says, after Hank Schrader says that they turned him out when he was street level, but now he's like the Jeffersons moving on up. Of course, that callback was to 4 years previously, when we see the scene here of Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez at MDC, Operation Icebreaker, exactly at Lewis A9. And just to see the story come full circle is pretty cool here. And yeah, quite the parallel of Steve Gomez from how he looked in again, it's more sort of a lost cause at this point when I think about all of the other sort of errors in continuity when it comes to characters. But yeah, quite the if I can find a shot here of Gomez. But yeah, this is his not in focus, but quite a stark contrast here of how he looked in season 1 of Breaking Bad to how he looked when he was 4 years younger in Better Call Saul. So yeah, a lot of great dialogue here for sure. So yeah, testing 1, 2, 3. That's a great point for sure over the course of this episode, and I'll definitely get to that great scene when following Walter White saying that he has cancer and him finally admitting it to his family as part of this sort of alibi to justify his sort of erroneous actions on the surface that took place over the previous 3 episodes. That scene where Hank says to him, no matter what happens, always take care of your family. And yeah, we can definitely see the sort of I guess, pride that Walter White is experiencing, and how almost this comment seems to emasculate him a little bit as well. So, at Pulsar, appreciate the feedback. Yeah, there was an issue with the audio a little bit earlier, so appreciate the feedback there. But yeah, that's a great point at testing 123, where he definitely comes across as this very sort of one-dimensional character. And again, there's so much here in this cold opening scene where, at the same time, what's pretty crazy is that, of course, when Hank is immediately, this is sort of the genesis of him starting to chase this white whale of Heisenberg. He really doesn't even know who he is yet. And it's funny, on the surface, we sort of, I don't know if we truly can comprehend how much this is going to sort of hurt and impact Hank when he finally gets the reveal here, because again, it's quite ironic that the person he's looking for is, in the moment, his brother-in-law. And of course, there's this great sort of juxtaposition pan to Hank talking about how Albuquerque may have a new kingpin to, of course, Walter White, if I can, of course, find the shot here. But this very sort of, almost funny sort of caricature of Walter White in a way to sort of, I can never find the right words, almost sort of demean him, or sort of just make him sort of seem buffoonish, if you will, this sort of new kingpin in Albuquerque. But what's pretty crazy, and what I think about when watching the scene as hindsight, is that when the sort of revelation finally comes to blow in the episode entitled Blood Money, we just see just how unbelievably betrayed Hank Schrader was. At Pulsura, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. All the support you've given to this channel. This episode is kind of where the story starts. Yeah, absolutely, at Pulsura. I view it that way entirely. I've definitely talked about how the first 3 episodes was kind of like a mini movie, if you will, to sort of set up the backstory of why Walter White does what he does. And in this episode here, I mean, the real sort of theme we see is this sort of, coming to terms with family, if you will. I was sort of thinking about it as I was rewatching this episode. And of course, we see the fallout of Walter White having to admit to Skyler the fact that he has cancer, and his family finally figuring out that he has cancer. And we really see all these negative consequences that Walter White did not want to deal with, such as him having to go through chemotherapy and realizing how much it's going to cost. And of course, that great piece of dialogue at the end of this episode where, of course, Skyler wants him to go about the treatment, but of course, Walter White wants nothing to do with it because he's thinking just $90,000 out of pocket just to start, and nothing is guaranteed, so we spend all of this money so I live a couple of years and then I just leave you with all of this debt. I mean, to be rather morbid about it, and it's definitely something that I imagine Walter White was thinking about, was that you're basically bankrupting this family in order to keep me alive for a little bit, and then you are just totally hampered with all of this debt. And this is not something that Walter White wants to, leave for his family. And of course, Skyler is sort of thinking of it in a very sort of, I don't even know, the almost, how do I put this? Just the traditional emotional response. She loves this man. You want to keep this man alive. Damn the consequences, even if it does bankrupt your family. Of course, we do see the entire Deus Ex Machina in the very next episode when Elliot at Gray Matter offers to pay for his entire treatment. Of course, Walt rejects that, but I don't want to get ahead of myself here. But yeah, just a lot of sort of themes here for sure. At Henry Lemoyne, again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. Walt looked older with hair than when he went bald. Interesting sort of take there. At testing 123 maternal instinct. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of premise. I mean, his kid. Well, that is at the same time the actor Bryan Cranston, who was portraying him, got 7, or I can't do math here, about 5 years older, 6 years older over the course of the filming of the show, so his character's going to look older. But I don't know, maybe the goatee also made him look older. I'm not too sure. Maybe, again, there's something about the film also. I mean, I feel like, I know Vince Gilligan has talked about this a little bit, the film juxtaposed with the digital copies that we see Better Call Saul being filmed on, how Better Call Saul is shot digitally and this is shot with film. I don't know. Maybe it just makes you look even younger, the film. I'm not so sure, because I remember in the very next episode of Breaking Bad after this, a Gray Matter, when we see that scene of Jesse applying for the advertising job at the bank, I'm almost awestruck by how young he looks in that episode as well. So, yeah, I would say he does. That is kind of an interesting point, but at the same time, the actor did get much older at Henry Lemoyne, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. So, and then again, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate the support. But yeah, to kind of go back a little bit to what I was like saying here in respect to when this scene finally comes to blows in the episode entitled Blood Money, it's just kind of crazy just to think about how, I mean, that's just kind of the way I feel all stories are sort of written. Season 1 is much more lighthearted. Again, I know I haven't seen Barry yet, but I do want to watch it at some point. But I definitely know that Season 1 is much more lighthearted and comical, and as the seasons progress, it gets way more dark and intense, so I've been told. I don't think that counts as a true spoiler, but yeah, again, it's something I was really thinking about here on top of the whole Crazy 8 backstory being confirmed based on the story that was written in Better Call Saul. Just also how sort of low stakes and comical and buffoonish this whole sort of premise is at this moment in time, with Hank being the one who's chasing down Heisenberg. But again, just to juxtapose, like I talked about in Blood Money, how unbelievably portrayed Hank Schrader was. I mean, my goodness, when he says, it was you all along, it was you. I mean, just absolutely betrayed, just saying to him, I don't know who you are anymore. I will bury you under the jail, just being absolutely betrayed by his brother-in-law. So yeah, it's just pretty crazy how the story really developed and matured and progressed over the course of this series. And yeah, it's kind of the my sort of viewing of this opening scene here, where we get a little bit of the backstory of Crazy 8 and Emilio, which was confirmed to us in season 5, episode 3, if I'm not mistaken. The guy for this, Better Call Saul. And yeah, so following this cold opening scene here, we then flash to this great scene of the cookout with Walt and his family. At MC Mel, at Mel, again, I swear I'm dyslexic. At Mel MC, thank you so much for what am I say? You do a better job promoting my channel than I do, so I really appreciate it for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you would be so kind, if you are enjoying this, to give it a thumbs up, that apparently really helps with the algorithm. So I appreciate the support there for sure at Mel MC. But yeah, so great scene here, and again, without wanting to get bogged down in every single little piece of dialogue here, all of the nitty gritty, all of the humor that's interjected here. I mean, a great scene here that I really love is the scene of Walt cooking the chicken, and we hear this sort of, high-pitched sound of the chicken cooking, if you will. And of course, we really see the sort of, I mean, I don't even know how to say this. It kind of came across as post-traumatic stress to me when we see Walter White cooking these, I guess, chicken carcasses, if you will. And we have to remember that in the episode prior, he had just been chemically disincorporating Emilio Koyama's body in hydrofluoric acid. And it was then also heavily implied that he did the exact same with Domingo, Crazy 8. And yeah, it kind of goes to that piece of dialogue that Jesse Pinkman said in the second episode, Cats in the Bag, where he kind of says about Emilio, just a bunch of meat, just a bunch of meat. And in the grand scheme of things, I mean, yeah, it is kind of morbid, if you will, where I guess chickens are animals and in many respects, and we're animals as well. And yeah, kind of a... he can't even sort of look at, cooking chicken the same way. Again, a lot of, in my opinion of this scene, and my interpretation of this scene, a lot of sort of post-traumatic stress flashbacks to the step-by-step process by which it probably took to chemically disincorporate Crazy 8's body. Because we remember even back from, again, 2 episodes prior, when he's talking with Jesse Pinkman about how Jesse said the hardware store didn't sell a plastic container that was big enough for a body. Walter White even himself said, cut the body down in half, legs in one, torso in the other. And while none of this was shown on screen, and while they likely didn't have access to those, I mean, what are those? Those 50-gallon barrels, if I'm not mistaken, maybe more, 100-gram barrel. I'm not sure how many gallons are in a barrel that they used to chemically disincorporate many characters over the course of this series. But yeah. Again, it's kind of funny, I guess, when you, not to be morbid here, but again, this is probably what's going through Walter White's mind here at the time, but, when you sort of, you take a chicken to be processed to turn a chicken to what is eventually food. I mean, all the steps that are required, the defeathering, the butchering, the cleaning. I mean, most people don't do that. It's usually done by a butcher, but of course, Walter White, to be extremely morbid, did that with another human being just prior to cooking this chicken here. So, yeah, it's that's sort of my very morbid interpretation of what is going through Walter White's head here. And of course, the humor interjected here with Hank saying he's basically burning the shit out of them. The humor interjected. And again, that was just sort of one tangent I wanted to go off here. I could really, talk about this, scene here forever and ever. There's so many tangents to potentially go off on. But in the grand scheme of things, this scene here is truly the sort of last moments of just normalcy that Hank Schrader, Marie Schrader, and Walter Jr. outside of Walt and Skyler get to have as a sort of family without the knowledge that Walter White has cancer. And that's sort of the overarching theme here. It's sort of, as Marie says later in this episode, we're acting as though nothing's wrong. We're having a cookout like everything's okay. And of course, the way the cat comes out of the bag here, to sort of use a, I guess to sort of, relate to the titles of these episodes, we see the scene here where the dialogue in this conversation that's happening on screen sort of leads to how Walt and Skyler eventually met. And again, I'm no sort of, romantic here. I can't really go off on a huge tangent about any sort of symbolism behind this sort of, meet cute, if you will, that was written between these two characters. But of course, we know that Skyler is just absolutely overcome with emotion here when Walt is recounting the story of how they met, because in the context of this story being told, Skyler had just been told by her husband that he has terminal lung cancer and that he's going to die within a couple of years. So, yeah, it's sort of the, we see Skyler emotionally break down here from this story, the sort of beginning and end of her relationship with Walter White, sort of being foreshadowed here, I guess, by this story that Walter White is telling here at this cookout. Again, I can't really go off on too much symbolism behind the actual sort of story that was written behind Skyler being a waitress at a diner. And I don't know if she was a waitress or if she worked at the restaurant and she was doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, and how Walt was doing him with her. And that's sort of how they eventually, first met and then sort of started dating and had this relationship. I can't go off on too much of a tangent there. My area of expertise would not make it possible. But yeah, so we eventually get the reveal here where Skyler breaks down in tears, and of course she just, storms away, saying, after Marie asked her what's wrong, she says, ask Walt. Marie sort of, saying what's going on here, and Walt sort of gives the big reveal where he says he has lung cancer, it's bad, and yeah, so we, again, without wanting to get bogged down in every single little specific piece of detail in this story, like I talked about a little bit earlier in the stream, we really see, I'm doing great, Sam Fisher, hope you're doing well yourself, excuse me. At Kate Valentine, thank you so much for the super chat, really appreciate the support. Bryan Cranston incorporates the Hal character into Walter White so ingeniously. Yeah, I mean, I talked about this a little bit in some of my previous streams, about how when I first started watching this show way back in 2011, actually, no, probably like January of 2012, when I first started watching the show in 2012, I talked about this. I literally could not see Bryan Cranston as Walter White. I was watching the goofy dad from Malcolm in the Middle, Hal, on my screen watching the show. So, and I remember when I watched this scene for the very first time at Kate Valentine, I remember I found myself laughing when he sort of says, it's bad. There's the sort of the comedic pause there. I found myself laughing, and because I really sort of saw the sort of Hal character here, who, again, all the sort of, the sort of wacky sort of assortment of misadventures that happens to Hal and the sort of crazy situations that he gets himself into that are, of course, based in comedy because it's a comedical sitcom, Malcolm in the Middle. But yeah, at Sam Fisher, Malcolm in the Middle was a prequel. But yeah, when you say he incorporates the Hal character into Walter White so ingeniously, yeah, I would say Walter White's, the Walter White versus Heisenberg persona, I would say he is a lot more like the sort of Mr. Chips, Hal Wilkerson, I think is sort of the last name of the character. I don't know if it's officially confirmed in Malcolm in the Middle, but yeah, if you go back to Vince Gilligan talking about why he even wanted to cast Bryan Cranston for this character as opposed to someone like John Cusack or Matthew Broderick, is because he worked with him on X-Files, I believe, and he played that one sort of, character. Again, I've never seen the X-Files, but he played that one sort of criminal character, and Vince Gilligan really saw him as this character who could be the sort of Hal, Malcolm in the Middle character when he needed to be when he was Walter White, but at the same time could be this incredibly menacing, just sort of, I don't even know what the word is, just menacing, intimidating character that was Heisenberg. And in many ways, the sort of, it is really true what Saul said to Walter White, I believe in the episode entitled Mandela, when he says, "What I do hear about Gus Fring, he sounds a little bit like you." And it's really true when we sort of see the two sides of Gus Fring when he's this sort of pillar of the community working at Los Pollos Hermanos. He's so just approachable and so non threatening and so just a very non-threatening, approachable person. This very sort of character, very similar to the sort of Walter White, Hal character, but at the same time, we know that this sort of alter ego that Gus Fring has of this drug kingpin, when that unbelievable scene in the episode entitled Crawl Space, when he fires Walter White in the desert and says, your brother-in-law, he's a problem that you promised to deal with. Now it's up to me to deal with him. If you try to interfere, this becomes a much simpler matter. I will kill your wife. I will kill your son. I will kill your infant daughter. And we, as the audience, really get to see these both sides of Gus Fring that really remind me of the sort of both sides of Walter White, the Heisenberg versus Walter White, which was when Vince Gilligan, I guess, was writing and sort of, I guess, going in his head how he wanted this show to be presented on screen. This was a big component of this. So yeah, I would absolutely agree that was extremely intentional by the creators to cast Bryan Cranston as this character. And if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but like I said, I know that he was by no means the first choice, and I know the AMC executives were thinking about someone like John Cusack or Matthew Broderick, but I think, again, I can never re-find this interview, but I swear I heard an interview where, again, maybe Bryan Cranston was embellishing here a little bit and not telling what exactly happened, but I believe that he sort of said his interpretation of when Vince Gilligan told the AMC executives that he wanted Walter White to portray this character. Of course, when Vince Gilligan goes into the pitch meeting and says, "I got this great show about this high school chemistry teacher who gets diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and wants to cook crystal methamphetamine to leave money for his family," they say, "Oh, great, we love it, unbelievable. So who do you have in mind playing the lead role?" And Vince Gilligan says, Bryan Cranston. And of course, he had just come off finishing shooting Malcolm in the Middle, and apparently Bryan Cranston said their reaction was more or less, "You want the goofy dad from Malcolm in the Middle to play this role?" But of course, in hindsight, as I've talked about in some previous videos, with everything that transpired, I don't think anyone could even picture in their head any other actor but Bryan Cranston portraying this character. So yeah, it's a really interesting point you bring up at Kate Valentine, and thank you again so much for the super chat. But yeah, it's a definitely intentional decision, I think, by the creators that they, especially Vince Gilligan, that why he just felt Bryan Cranston is my man to portray this character, and I feel like we are all the richer for it after seeing this unbelievable series. But yeah, so like I talked a little bit here with, I don't want to try to get bogged down in every single little specific piece of detail here, but of course, the grand premise, in my opinion, of this scene, of this long continuous scene, is that Walter White is dealing with the sort of ramifications that he really didn't want to deal with, where he has to sort of deal with coming to terms with the fact that he has very little money. He can't afford to pay for this treatment. And as he says at the very end of this episode, he does not want to have Skylar bankrupt their family and take on all of this debt just so that he can live for a couple more years. What is the point? I'm going to die anyway. My diagnosis is terminal. Why are we spending all this money and going into debt just to bankrupt yourself, even though I'm going to die anyway in these 2 years? I mean, I think that's maybe his thinking. Of course, over the course of a season 2 of Breaking Bad, we then get the sort of second opinion where I believe, or again, I'll have to go back and rewatch it, but of course, while initially in the pilot episode, the cancer was diagnosed as inoperable, of course, he is operated on in the season 2 finale of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled ABQ. So, yeah. Oh, at Mel MC. Okay, cool for sure. I hope I didn't sort of tell a total sort of tall tale there in respect to Bryan Cranston talking about his casting of Walter White. But yeah, he's dealing with the consequences here. A little bit of the sort of backstory intertwined as well, where again, I have to point this out, the pilot episode that I saw of Breaking Bad was not the original full-length pilot. It was the TV version of the pilot, and as I said, that used to be on Netflix prior to the full pilot. And the scene in the ambulance where the EMT asks Walter White if he was a smoker, that was actually omitted from the TV version of the pilot. So this was actually the very first time when we learned that Walter White never smoked. So just kind of a little side note here. Of course, Hank's saying, lung cancer. How does that make sense? You never smoked. Of course, I mean that's sort of the colloquial. I don't know if is that the right word, but the sort of yes, many people who get most people I feel like who get lung cancer smoke. But again, it's not only people who smoke get lung cancer. I definitely know people who died of lung cancer who never smoked. That is absolutely true. And as Skylar even said, she talked about how Walt once told her that story about how he worked in some lab and he claimed that he didn't have the proper ventilation. And yeah, it's definitely possible to get all sorts of lung diseases even if you don't smoke. But that's sort of neither here nor there, just sort of an interesting component of the backstory of Walter White. And you wonder, I mean, it is kind of interesting where I feel like nowadays we sort of know, again, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I feel like we know as a society, at least in the West in America, we know how, and probably around the world, how bad smoking is for you. So I feel like if someone smokes their entire life and gets lung cancer, it's kind of like, well, sort of makes sense. It's been known to happen, to sort of be blunt about it, as Saul Goodman was. 30-year smoker who smoked 2 packs a day dying of lung cancer. I'm going to go on a limb here and say it's been known to happen. So I don't know. I wonder if we would have maybe had much less sympathy for Walter White had he been written in as a smoker. And I definitely don't think he ever would have been. I don't think he would have been written in as a cigarette smoker, even though there are a lot of smokers in this universe. And how Vince Gilligan has even joked himself, how it's kind of funny how I even talked about how the scene in Waterworks with Jesse and Kim talking about Combo, about how I believe Vince Gilligan, talked about this on the Insider podcast for this episode, and he's talked about it in many other occasions as well, about how, say what you will about smoking, but my goodness, does it look cool on camera. And, again, I mean, that's why, you'd imagine that's why people initially do it, because it's sort of, it looks cool, I suppose. It sort of gives them a sort of edge or a sort of persona. But again, it's kind of, I definitely know Vince Gilligan has sort of joked about all the smoking that he's written into this universe, and how he sort of was kind of joking about if he can only make smoking cool again. That's sort of his joke. Where it is kind of true. Despite I will concede it. Despite how unbelievably terrible smoking is for you, it is kind of edgy, if you will. It can be sort of edgy and cool, if you will, in the right context. And it's this scene right here, as Vince Gilligan, I believe, even said on the Insider podcast, they didn't have to be smoking. I mean, these characters didn't have to smoke, but both of them do kind of do smoke in this universe, and it just sort of added another sort of element and component to this scene. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent there in respect to Hank saying that Walt was never a smoker. But yeah, and I talked about this a little bit earlier as well, when Skylar then goes on to check on Walter Jr., and we sort of see that sort of story come full circle as well, with Walter Jr.'s reaction to the fact that his father has lung cancer. What is up, Just Dan? We see this great scene here where Hank says to Walt, no matter what happens, I will take care of your family. And of course, Walt's reaction to this is very telling. We can definitely see the sort of likely pride that Walter White is experiencing, and how, in many ways, I mean, I don't want to speak for Walter White. We don't know what's going on inside of his head. We can only sort of read into his reaction to Hank Schrader saying this on screen. But yeah, it definitely sort of seemed a little bit emasculating maybe to Walter White, where he didn't currently have the means to sort of take care of his family after his death, and maybe his brother-in-law and his sister-in-law had the more of the means. I mean, maybe they're probably better off. I mean, I think they definitely were better off at this point in time. Skylar wasn't working. Walter White was a underachieving high school chemistry teacher who didn't make very much money. Hank was a DEA agent, and his wife was also she was like an X-ray technician, if I'm not mistaken. Or again, I'm totally butchering Marie's profession, but she worked in the medical field as well. So, they probably had much more means. And again, they even later in this episode, they talked about borrowing from Hank and Marie. And of course, Walt's pride does not let him do so. And we definitely see pride as being a very central theme in Walter White sort of coming to terms with having to tell his family about his cancer diagnosis, because his sort of initial plan of cooking methamphetamine behind the scenes and not telling his wife and family really blew up in front of his face, as I talked about in my previous stream. And the only real way out of the situation, which wouldn't just totally destroy him and his family, was to sort of tell a half truth and say my crazy, erratic, erroneous behavior over the last month is because I was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I hid it from you. I'm having a sort of breakdown, and of course, very understandable by Skylar. You could definitely sort of understand it or justify it if you were Skylar. So, at Jonathan McMahon, yeah, for sure, that is funny right there. So. Yeah, Jay Ladybug, I agree. I agree for sure. So, at Sam Fisher, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. This is one of the best episodes of Breaking Bad, in my opinion. It shows a family's struggle with a debilitating disease and how each of them cope. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I agree. Family is definitely an extremely key theme of this episode. That was sort of like, as I was rewatching this episode for this about the 24th time, I definitely know it was really, what's crazy here too is that again, it was definitely intentional by the creators at Sam Fisher, where we initially see Walter White's fallout with his family when he talks about his cancer diagnosis. And of course, this is then juxtaposed over the course of this episode where we first get to see a glimpse into Jesse Pinkman's family as well, and sort of seeing him dealing with the fallout of his experience working with Walter White as well. And of course, while he has no family to sort of come clean to in the same capacity as Walter White in regards to his meth cooking, that's not entirely true, because we sort of learn about the very interesting backstory of Jesse Pinkman here, where we get to see a little bit about his family dynamic and how they definitely know that he's into some not great things. And like I said, while it seemed as though only Walt would have to sort of deal with the fallout of everything that just happened, we see Jesse deal with it a little bit as well, which is sort of the B story that's happening here. And yeah, it is really true. This is one again. I love season one. Season one again might be my favorite season in hindsight. Definitely, I think a little bit underrated when all is said and done. Definitely doesn't get the same acclaim as season 5 does. And it's so crazy to think that when this was on the air, Breaking Bad was not a popular show whatsoever. So again, a major shout out to all of the OGs who were watching this on television back in 2008. Before this was popular. I can definitely not claim to be one of them, but my goodness, I mean, if you stumbled upon this show way back then and were watching it for sure. So yeah, again, I agree. Now I would go a little bit further than that at Sam Fisher, and thank you again so much for the support. I really appreciate it. It's yeah, I love season 1. This is a great episode for sure. Definitely sort of, like you said, shows how every sort of family member deals with the struggle individually, and of course, this finally sort of completely sort of comes to blows with that, talking pillow scene that happens in the next episode that I've already seen some people reference in the chat. So, at Richie MC, I remember that. I definitely remember, I wasn't watching Breaking Bad at the time, but I definitely remember back right around when Breaking Bad was airing, right around 2010, 11. I hadn't, just Dan, yeah, for sure. But, yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. That's for the next episode for sure. But yeah, I remember I knew someone who was watching Mad Men on TV right around 2010, and yeah, that's when Breaking Bad was on as well. So, but yeah, so following us first getting a glimpse into the life of Walter White, it then pans to none other than Jesse Pinkman, and like I said, we get our first glimpse into the character combo. And yeah, pretty cool callback, like I talked about, to the episode entitled Waterworks, where we learned that Kim Wexler represented Combo in juvenile court when he was 17, because we know from the, I believe, the season 2 finale of Breaking Bad, in the episode entitled ABQ, we learned that he was 17 years old when he stole the baby Jesus from the Knights of Columbus Major. And I mean, so with that being said, I mean, I think Combo is he's not a teenager here. He's definitely likely in his 20s. So I would imagine that defense likely happened when Kim was much younger and doing pro bono work, prior to her doing her pro bono work when Better Call Saul was going on. Because if he was 17 when that was happening, I mean, I don't know exactly how old Combo was here, but I imagine he's at least in his mid-20s. So that was probably, maybe 7 years ago when Kim Wexler was just starting out as a lawyer at HHM and working on the pro bono work for a character like Combo. Because if he was only 17 back then I wouldn't imagine that he's I guess it's possible that he's like 19, 20 here. I don't know if we ever get an exact confirmation on how old he is, but and I don't want to get too sort of nitpicky with, oh, is that technically a plot hole? Was Kim not a lawyer yet? Was she not doing the pro bono cases because she was still working in the mailroom? When did she sort of get, Combo again? I think he's in his 20s, but he definitely looks a lot older. And so, I definitely did think about that, but I don't want to sort of go too much down that rabbit hole about, I guess if I really wanted to, I could sort of, when did Kim, get her law degree? When did she start working as a lawyer? Again, but at the same time, we don't know how old Combo was, if I'm not mistaken. I would imagine he's in his 20s, though. Because, I mean, he went into a strip club, but again, maybe if he could have had a fake ID, I suppose, if he was super young. But, that's sort of a discussion for a different video. But, yeah, we get our first glimpse into sort of Combo as well as Jesse Pinkman's inner circle here, if you will. So, again, of course, he brings up the ceiling falling down and Jesse not wanting to divulge the fact that he chemically disincorporated Emilio, his partner, in a hydrofluoric acid bath. So that's sort of swept under the rug here. And again, without sort of getting into every single little nitty-gritty detail here, we see, again, I mean, there's a lot of dialogue that happens here, but of course, the main sort of premise of the scene is that we see Jesse Pinkman start using methamphetamine again. And it's sort of an interesting scene here where initially he says to them that he doesn't want to use this methamphetamine, despite the fact it's the best batch he cooked ever because it's all scientific and it's this new formula, but he wants to lay off it for health reasons. But of course, when Combo and Skinny Pete then say, all right, we'll leave then, Jesse, not wanting to be alone, I would imagine, again, this is sort of a less debaucherous version of what he'll do over the course of Breaking Bad. We're following him killing Gale at the end of season 3 of Breaking Bad, and then in season 4, where his house is absolutely like Skid Row, as Walter White says, he really sort of surrounds himself with people to sort of distract his mind from everything that's going on. And I would imagine that he wouldn't want his friends to leave here. I mean, maybe because they're also his friends, but I definitely don't think Jesse would want to be alone with his thoughts here, where he had everything that just happened with Emilio and Crazy 8. He'd rather just sort of numb his mind and use this methamphetamine to sort of not deal with all of the sort of emotional turmoil that he's dealing with here. Yeah, at Henry Lemoyne. Yeah, that was a hilarious piece of dialogue there for sure. When the house is settling, hit me in the eye to sort of explain why he has a black eye when really he hit himself in the face on a rock when he was running away from Crazy 8 and Emilio when they wanted to kill him because he thought that he brought a DEA informant to the sort of meet, if you will, in the middle of the desert. So kind of a hilarious piece of dialogue there for sure. And again, that's sort of the main premise here. I don't want to get bogged down in every single, so much comedy interjected in this scene, so much humor. But of course, following this, we then see Jesse Pinkman sort of dealing with the fallout of him using methamphetamine and being very paranoid. We see him using it in this scene here continuously. And yeah, again, while we don't know for sure, I mean, I'm no expert in this the usage of this Schedule 2 controlled substance, but I definitely have sort of seen a few of those. What's that one show called on? It's like on A&E. It's about the addicts and stuff like that. I forgot what it's called. I've seen it from time to time, but I definitely know that if you use amphetamine, you can definitely be up for days and days and days. I've heard about that as well, just from historical accounts of like soldiers using it and things like that, how you'd be up for days and days and days. Like Jesse Pinkman probably was. He probably hadn't slept in days following all this methamphetamine use, and it was probably making him paranoid, like he talked about a little bit earlier. And as we see, Strange Addictions, is that it at J Ladybug? I'll take your word for it. I've seen it on YouTube from time to time. But yeah, I definitely know that you can just stay up for days. But of course, as we see later in this episode, when he maybe, I appreciate it at J Ladybug. I'll take your word for it for now. But when he does finally get to his parents' house, we then see him total of absolutely crash, probably sleeping for, maybe, 16, 17, 18 hours, something like that, when the camera pans from night to day to back to night, maybe even not quite 24 hours probably, but, probably 16, 18 hours. But yeah, we see Jesse sort of have these sort of paranoid delusions here where he sees these, I think they're probably meant to be, LDS missionaries here, the Church of Latter-day Saints missionaries, something to that effect. He sort of thinks that these are sort of bikers who are trying to come to his house to hurt him. And again, like I said, I'm no expert here, but I definitely don't think that, I know it doesn't make you hallucinate. It wouldn't actually make you see completely different things. it wouldn't. I think what, of course, what you would actually more like less see is you would see these actual bikers here, but they would be coming to your house and you'd be all paranoid and think of them as a threat. And but of course, while this isn't sort of the actual sort of I think effects you get from using this substance, I think this was a sort of well done sort of visual metaphor for what Jesse was experiencing here when he saw these missionaries come to his door and leave the pamphlets and bicycle away. He sort of saw them as some sort of threat and wasn't thinking clearly and thinking very paranoid. And this sort of scene here was to sort of be a metaphorical sort of literary device by which to explain, I guess, Jesse Pinkman's methamphetamine use, if you will. If that makes sense. Like I said, I'll defer to people who are experts in that. I am no expert in this in the use of this substance whatsoever, but at Jonathan McMahon, yeah, I'd have to watch The Sopranos first before I reviewed it. So, like I said, I've seen clips here and there on YouTube, but I have not yet seen the show cover to cover. So, but yeah, following this, pretty great scene here. Again, pretty symbolic in my opinion, where we see Walter White having to deal with his wound here from when Crazy 8 stabbed him with the piece of a broken plate in the previous episode. He, of course, couldn't go to a doctor because I guess it's the same way how Nacho couldn't go to the doctor when he was shot by Tyrus and Victor in season 4 of Better Call Saul, I believe, in the episode entitled Something Beautiful. So yeah, again, he just kind of an interesting scene here where he has to sort of deal with this wound himself. He can't go to the doctor because he doesn't want to have to divulge how he got the stab wound. And yeah, I mean, I know that the police have to report all gunshot wounds, or no, the hospital has to report all gunshot wounds to the police. But I don't know if Walt could actually tell a logical alibi for why he has these repeated stab wounds here. And again, these are definitely stab wounds. I don't think you can say, oh, I fell repeatedly over and over and over again on this sort of same thing, where I feel like any sort of forensic, I don't even know, doctor or detective could absolutely see that these were stab wounds. So just kind of an interesting scene here where he has to sort of deal with this himself. And of course, we then see the sort of fallout continue here where Skyler, again, I sort of glossed over it in the scene initially where Marie talks about how what's next for Walt. He needs a second opinion. We get him in touch with the best oncologist, and that's what Skyler does for Walt. Walt, of course, is very taken aback by the piece of dialogue where Skyler says, I'll put it on a credit card. And Walt sort of really thinking about the money being a very key theme here. Of course, I talked about, I sort of buried the lead. I didn't want to bury the lead when I talked about the fact that at the very end of this episode, Walt talks about how he doesn't want to just bankrupt the family so he can live a little bit longer. I'm not going to do that. My pride won't allow that my pride won't let me allow that to happen, basically, is what he's thinking. At Richie MC, yeah, I don't know if that's going to fly. That is pretty hilarious, though, but I'm not sure if that is going to fly as a alibi for your stab wounds. But yeah, so here we see the lies begin where Walt says, okay, we'll meet with him. We'll get the opinion. All we have to do is just meet with him. The initial appointment will likely be extremely expensive. So he says he will borrow the money he needs against his pension. Of course, this is immediately juxtaposed with him going to his pension in air quotes, where we go to the money that he earned, if you will, again in air quotes, when he didn't really sell his meth to Crazy 8. But the money that Crazy 8 sort of brought with them to the meet and took after he had to kill him because Crazy 8 and Emilio were effectively going to kill Walter White. But yeah, so we see him here getting the money that he's going to need to go to his oncology appointment. We see the sort of fallout here of Walter Jr. kind of saying, what is going on with you? You're acting as though everything is normal and you're not dying. Sort of, again, more of a sort of preface and foreshadow for the really sort of powerful piece of dialogue that Walter Jr. says later in this episode. We then get a very quick shot of the, if I can try to find it here, might try to be hard to find the shot here. Man, you can never get the exact frame. Maybe, oh my goodness. But yeah, this is we see a quick shot of them. Maybe I can play this. Probably shouldn't, but again, why can't I find the frame? Here we go. There we go. So yeah, we get a quick shot here of the Tampico furniture frame here, which of course was a callback to the previous episode when we know that Crazy 8 said that his father owned Tampico furniture and that he worked there. And of course, the grand irony here is that Walt did actually buy the crib from Tampico, as this shot here displays to us. So yeah, just sort of the story sort of coming full circle here, and really sort of seeing, I guess, how small of a world Albuquerque sort of is. I mean, I guess it is the sort of premise of the small world phenomenon where you meet someone completely new, or you meet a stranger, but yet you have some sort of connection to them, right? You have a sort of personal connection to a stranger. That's sort of where the expression "small world" comes from, I think, and that's sort of what's being displayed to us here, if you will. Just sort of a very sort of surreal, a little bit morbid scene here where it's kind of, and again, it's sort of the sort of birth, death, life cycle where we see that Crazy 8, the owner of this furniture store, was killed by Walter White, but at the same time, Holly White will be the person who, I guess, uses this crib. And the same sort of premise was used, I believe, in the episode entitled, I believe it was the episode entitled ABQ, when following the, I believe it was the scene when Jane's father was looking for the dress for her to wear at her memorial service, and that was immediately juxtaposed with Holly White's diaper being changed and her yawning. So the sort of, the life cycle, the sort of, the birth, decay, transformation sort of theme being intertwined on screen to us over the course of this series. So I kind of like the sort of metaphorical aspect that is being displayed to us over the course of this show. And yeah, that this one kind of stands out to me, and it really reminds me. That was sort of a great scene there, where that scene of, like I said, the scene of Donald Margolis picking out that dress is immediately then juxtaposed with a scene of Holly White. So yeah, just a lot of symbolism in this show, and yeah, it's pretty obvious to say why I love it so much. But yeah, I agree. At Bube Washer Vesterham. Wash and Vesterham again. I mean, is that Dutch? It kind of sounds Dutch. Maybe I'm wrong there, but yeah, I agree. The symbolism in the show is unreal. I would agree wholeheartedly. But of course, following this, we then see him taking this money to the bank to turn it into a cashier's check, because again, a little bit suspicious if you show up with cash, especially when Walt said that he was going to borrow it against his pension, and they're not just going to give him non-sequential bills that are essentially drug money. And of course, while he's waiting for the parking spot here, we see the character Ken totally snake his spot and just sort of very unceremoniously take his spot, being very self-centered and an absorbed, just sort of narcissistic, absorbed character here. And of course, we know that from Better Call Saul, Jimmy and Kim also had their run-in with this exact same character in the premiere of Season 2 of Better Call Saul in the episode entitled Switch, when they scammed Ken following Jimmy leaving the law and rejecting the job offer from Davison, Maine. He then sort of takes the job more or less for Kim. Again, that's an entirely different tangent that I don't really want to go off on right now. But yeah, again, without wanting to get bogged down in every single little piece of dialogue here, a lot of humor interjected here. Ken, I mean, very painted as a very sort of typical sort of stockbroker character. I mean, he could fit right in the sort of Wolf of Wall Street mantra, very sort of self-absorbed, thinking about money, very obscene in his talking. He's very sort of openly obscene and vulgar here, and we of course see Walter White just absolutely eyeballing him here in this scene, wanting to sort of do something here, but of course at this point in time in his character development, he's unable to do so. And again, what's he gonna do here in this scene? I mean, he can't openly assault him. I mean, he would absolutely probably sue him, and Walter White's life would be greatly impacted by this. But again, we sort of see the gears turning here, where Walt wants to again enact some sort of revenge against this character. And again, a lot of juxtaposition here, where we see this young character who's again very vulgar, but everything is going well for him. He's driving a Mercedes. He's doing very well. He's complaining about how a $40,000 bonus for one quarter isn't enough. And at the same time, it's juxtaposed with this character, Walter White, who's just dealt this unbelievably bad hand. He's this terminal lung cancer diagnosis. He essentially has no money. He didn't take any risks in his life. And just the sort of juxtaposition of these two characters here. And yeah, it's kind of a sort of a real, in my opinion, just a real sort of symbolic premise of just how unfair this universe really is. And it is true. I mean, the universe is a sort of cruel, sort of I don't know, cruel void, if you will, where there's a lot of just unfairness in this universe and a lot of just people who are dealt very bad hands, and there's no real rhyme or reason to any of it. And we sort of see Walter White seeing himself being drawn the short stick here, and Ken, at this point in time, everything is going well for him. And, he's initially painted as not a very sort of good, moral, upstanding character, but his life is going very, very well. And for all intents and purposes, I know, again, we'll never know what's going on in Walter White's head. This is just sort of my interpretation of this scene here, but Walter White may be thinking about how he did everything right, he played by the rules, and where did that get me? Nowhere. Sort of what Saul said, or Jimmy at the time said as well to Kim Wexler in that exact same episode with Ken, when they're just before they scam him there. So playing by the rules never got me anywhere. And again, it's sort of just, again, of course, it sets up the grand sort of final amazing scene here where he blows up Ken's BMW at the gas station. But yeah, just a lot to think about here for sure. I feel like I could go off on a complete tangent here in this scene as well, but yeah, quite the scene here that really sets up where this story will go at the very end of this episode. Ooh, and then following this, my goodness, this scene here when we finally get to see a glimpse into the life of Jesse Pinkman. Now, again, I was trying to figure out. I don't want to sort of get bogged down in every sort of little piece of dialogue here that happens over the course of this storyline with Jesse Pinkman. But of course, many of you probably know how I feel personally about Jesse Pinkman. Again, I wouldn't say I definitely don't hate the character, but I just sort of, I don't understand sort of maybe all of the love and all of the sort of free pass that he sort of gets, and the sort of the little bit of more deservingness of happiness compared to other characters. Again, I don't want to go off on an entire tangent about this, but yeah, it's kind of interesting here. We get to sort of see a glimpse into the life of Jesse Pinkman, and again, we don't know what Jesse Pinkman's childhood was like, and again, we see a glimpse into his brother, Jake Pinkman here in this episode. The only episode which we see this character, Jake Pinkman, and again, there's even some debate on how old his character is. I think he's listed as 14, but he definitely doesn't look 14, and we sort of know that Jesse Pinkman is, 25 years old in season 4 of Breaking Bad, in the episode entitled Crawl Space. And so the point I'm trying to get at is that Jesse Pinkman had a very tumultuous childhood. He wasn't very academically inclined. He wasn't a very sort of good student. He got into trouble a lot, and it likely caused a lot of tension and friction with his parents. It definitely did. And again, I don't know the entire backstory of their family here for sure, but it definitely seems as though they had their second child much later after Jesse. Jake is definitely at least 10 years younger than Jesse, if not more. So kind of having that second child much, much later after they have Jesse Pinkman. And of course, the sort of grand irony in the juxtaposition here is that Jake Pinkman is sort of everything that Jesse Pinkman is not. He's a very good student, extremely academically inclined, almost a sort of a quasi, I guess, sort of, I don't even know the word you would use. Is wonderkin the right word? But I mean, he's musically gifted. He's a mathlete. He even won some award for being environmentally conscious about asking the Albuquerque Journal what sort of bleach they use to dye their paper, if I'm not mistaken. So again, very sort of thinking about concepts that are pretty advanced for a child that's likely between maybe 11 and 14 years old, something like that. Yeah, definitely a prodigy child. Yeah, Jay Ladybug. He's the antithesis of Jesse Pinkman, and we can definitely see that his parents probably absolutely sort of love this this child who is really just probably everything they would ever hope to have had in a child after having this sort of problem child, if you will, of Jesse Pinkman. And of course, we see Jesse going to his parents' house, maybe just irrationally, or again, we cannot know what's going on through his head, just sort of out of fear of people going to his house to hurt him after everything that happened with Crazy 8 and Emilio, him thinking very, very irrationally what was up at Stone Yoda. And of course, we see him engage with his family here. Of course, he then has this absolute meth pass out here where he just totally crashes after probably have been up for 3 or 4 days. Nah, I don't know about that, but who knows? He's probably been up for days just using meth and just crashes here for probably almost 24 hours. But while that's sort of the progression of the storyline here, kind of going back to just how his parents probably feel about him, we definitely hear them talking, going back and forth, where his father is basically saying, we're not doing this again. We've been down this road a million times, figuratively speaking. His mom says this later in the episode as well. We're putting our foot down. And again, it is just based on the dialogue of this scene. We can definitely understand that Jesse probably got into trouble so often when he was in middle school, high school, just in trouble again and again, probably using drugs and other substances, just being not a good student. Just his parents probably just fed up with just, again, giving, America is the land of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances, but maybe after, 15, 20 chances, they just say, okay, enough is enough. That's sort of the vibe I got here. But of course, after seeing Jesse, they in the moment, they sort of see him here. Again, it's a very sort of, I don't even know how you describe this scene here. It's just very, maybe emotional, just, again, at the same, the grand premise here is, yes, while they're probably absolutely frustrated with their son, he's still their son. And again, there's this sort of bond and tie that family has that just runs deeper than so many other things, as Hector Salamanca himself said, La Familia es todo. So we see him sort of setting the table here, and, again, maybe it's a very sort of simple act, but it really just, seeing their son, maybe again, giving him just this one more chance. Maybe it will be different this time. They allow him to stay. And even though his mom says, we should check his arm for needle marks, likely implying that he had been a drug user in the past. And really just sort of foreshadowing a little bit of the backstory of Jesse Pinkman here. So, yeah, at Stone Yoda, that's sort of a great point. I mean, it kind of goes back to the movie El Camino when he makes that phone call to his parents about, trying to drive them out of the house in order for him to go in and get those guns. But he says to his parents again, whether he was sincere or not, basically saying, whatever happened with me, it wasn't your fault. You tried your best, and whatever happened with me was not your fault. And yeah, I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is here, and I've talked about this in the past, is that yes, we feel sorry for Jesse, et cetera, but he had the sort of exact same upbringing as Jake Pinkman did, seemingly. I mean, unless, you would imagine that's sort of the vibe that I got. Again, we don't know. Maybe his upbringing was completely different, or his parents' just financial situation was completely different when he was younger compared to when Jake was growing up. But you would imagine all the same opportunities and same sort of, again, all the same sort of chances and opportunities were provided and given to Jesse Pinkman, but just something about his internal makeup just didn't allow him to succeed in this sort of very traditional model of upbringing for a child. Again, again, me talking about this is just, I am so out of school here. I am no expert in child rearing and nature versus nurture and all of that. But yeah, it is kind of an interesting sort of premise where, Jesse's this troubled character who, goes down this road, is a drug user, ends up manufacturing and distributing methamphetamine, ends up committing first-degree murder, going down a very bad path. But you would again, it's sort of when we think about characters like that, I mean, I see more of a character like Nacho Varga, who came from much more humble upbringings, even more than Jesse Pinkman did. And sort of I can wrap my mind around why Nacho did what he did, but at the same time, I mean, it's extremely complex, and I can't, again, I'm no expert on any of this, but it just kind of surreal to think about just how sort of, middle class, maybe even upper middle class of an upbringing Jesse had, and all the opportunities that he had, and, for whatever reason, he just didn't really fit in this traditional model of success, and, he used drugs, he was a bad student, and he made some questionable choices despite having all the opportunities to you know to not make these choices. And I mean, you think about people who come from far worse circumstances than Jesse Pinkman, people who come from just inescapable poverty in many respects, and they managed to turn their life. Again, it's really hard. I'm not going to say it's not easy, and there's not advantages that Jesse had compared to people who were born in absolute poverty. But yeah, at Richie MC, we don't know. We're implying we don't know that their upbringings were different. Again, it's just sort of our opinion. But yeah, again, I feel like there are people who are born into far worse circumstances than Jesse Pinkman who don't go down this road. So again, it's a very sort of nature nurture debate. I'm no expert. I don't want to sort of put my foot in my mouth here in respect to any of this, but yeah, it's definitely sort of something I've thought about for sure. And it really is sort of a component of Jesse Pinkman's sort of story that I feel like isn't sort of focused on as much as I think it should be, with the sort of fact that he came from this sort of middle class, maybe even upper middle class upbringing, and he didn't come from sort of dirt poverty. Like I would imagine that a lot of people in the cartel came from very, very poor upbringings where you wonder, why do you want to get involved in this extremely dangerous line of work where characters like Arturo are getting killed likely in their late 20s, early 30s. But if you come from just absolute sort of destitute poverty and you don't have a lot of opportunities, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to sort of be infatuated and go about the sort of entrepreneurial cartel drug sort of business. But when you come from more of a sort of middle class to maybe even upper middle class upbringing, you would sort of scratch your head on why you would go down that route. And again, we don't know the sort of upbringing. We know that piece of dialogue that Jesse said to his parents, but yeah, a lot of food for thought here for sure. And I'm no expert in any of this, but it's definitely something I think about when I think about the story of Jesse Pinkman. That's for sure. So. At Pulsara, yeah, that's a great point. Where it was Jake's birthday, and that definitely was intentional by the creators. That's for sure. It was absolutely intentional to have the combination as Jake's birthday. And yeah, I mean, like I talked about a little bit earlier, I mean, just the absolute just love and sort of pride they have in Jake Pinkman. I think it's so obvious in my reading of watching the scene, because it's everything that Jesse wasn't, they finally got to experience with Jake Pinkman. So yeah, a lot of food for thought here. I'm no expert in any of this. Again, I could talk about this for hours, and I feel like there'd still be you could go back and forth with the arguments surrounding Jesse Pinkman's actions here. But yeah, it's a lot of food for thought here, and it's something I'll continue to think about as long as I enjoy watching this series. Yeah, I mean, great comments in the comment section for sure. Again, we'll never know. We don't know enough about Jesse Pinkman's upbringing to understand. And again, I don't even know about the whole nature nurture debate. But yeah, it's something I've thought about absolutely. And of course, like I talked about in this episode, a sort of main sort of theme here of being family. This is then immediately juxtaposed with Walter White at work. And instead of Walter Jr. going home on the bus, he decides to stay after school and stay with his dad and go home with his father. Likely sort of, it makes a lot of sense to me when you learn that your father is diagnosed with terminal cancer. You want to spend more time with him. You're not going to seemingly have very much time with him. And that's sort of Walter White's thinking, in my opinion. Again, I don't know what's going on with his head. Walter White kind of saying, things just kind of work out for themselves. We shouldn't really tend to worry. That's sort of the scene here. And of course, in the likely the next day, we then see this scene here again. The overall symbolism of this scene here again. I'm stumbling on my words here. Kind of going back and sort of thinking about the overall symbolism here. Like I talked about, just sort of Walter Jr. wanting to spend more time with his father, sort of like he's talked about a little bit earlier, how you're acting as though nothing is wrong, but Walter Jr. is clearly acting differently. Walter White is kind of going about the same role and the same routine, just living his life being a teacher. Yeah, that is funny at Stone Yoda, for sure. I've seen that meme for sure. But of course, things are not normal for Walter Jr. He's just not going about his day and taking the bus. He's living his life much differently, just based on the information that he's been given. So yeah, of course, that sort of scene comes to blows at the very end of this episode. Like I talked a little again, I sort of talked about this a little bit more. We learn more about the achievements of Jake Pinkman, with him being basically sort of a child prodigy. being very musically gifted, being very academically gifted, being the sort of the top level mathlete at his middle school, I believe, getting an environmental consciousness award, sort of thinking about, I mean, my goodness, I mean, this guy right here, thinking about being in middle school in 2008 and thinking about climate change back then, he is way ahead of his time, especially for how young he is. So really just sort of developing this character here. We see Jesse sort of trying to interact with his brother. This is the only episode we see of his brother. We see that sort of great scene with the piccolo, where he says, play some Jethro Tull. I believe Jethro Tull has flutes in it. It's that the band, someone plays flute in it. Don't quote me on that in regards to the reference. But we then see his mom come in and sort of make sure everything is okay. Jesse Pinkman getting very suspicious of this act by his mom, just sort of thinking that, his parents are worried that he's going to corrupt Jake and sort of turn him into Jesse. And to tell you the truth, I think Jesse Pinkman's sort of rationale and paranoia is probably based in some reality. How, while I don't think their parents really believe that Jake spending a little bit of time with Jesse would cause this, I think it is sort of a fear that they would maybe have, that this would sort of be their worst fear in the world, that their sort of prodigal son, if that's the right word, their prodigy son would somehow go down a path which made him turn into Jesse Pinkman. That is probably their greatest fear. I don't think they think it would actually happen, but I think sort of Jesse's rationale here is sort of right in many respects. And about how Jake even says, I'm the favorite, sort of you're claiming that I'm the favorite. All they do is talk about you. So yeah, it is kind of interesting how, despite the fact that they probably haven't seen Jesse in a long time, he's definitely on their mind a lot. And again, we don't know really what that means about when Jake says all they do is talk about you. But yeah, just a lot of food for thought here, and a lot of just, again, really, this episode here really gives us a huge piece of sort of backstory into this sort of life of Jesse Pinkman prior to him entering the Albuquerque criminal underworld here. So a lot of great food for thought here for sure. Like I said, more of the same, where we see him sort of, again, a pretty intentional scene here for sure, where we see Jesse Pinkman going about all of his artwork here, and how, again, we see it over the course of season 2. Yeah, at Bube, he does work. He does look really damn young, that is for sure. But again, a sort of very intentional scene here as well, where we also see this in the next season during his relationship with Jane, where, even though Jesse wasn't very academically inclined and probably didn't get good grades, he still had sort of talents in other areas in my respect. So, again, that's sort of what I view this scene here of him going about his childhood art sort of being to display to us, where we see that Jesse sort of has other skills, and while the sort of, society, the way society is structured, if you don't succeed in a very traditional academic sense, being someone who's good at sort of learning in a traditional setting and being a very good test taker and being a very good writer, you're not going to do very well in school, and that sort of sets you up for the sort of next phase in your life. But again, as it was sort of displayed to us over the course of Breaking Bad, Jesse had talents in other respects. He was a good artist. Oh, I don't know about good. I mean, art is a relative term, but I mean, he's a good artist, I would say. He has some sort of talent and passion for art. He tells that story about the box that he made in his woodworking class in high school. In high school, and so yeah, I think that's sort of the premise here of this scene. Of it's sort of juxtaposing the fact that while Jesse was traditionally, in an academic sense, not the best student and probably the furthest thing from it, he still had sort of skills in other areas where society maybe at that point in his life didn't value as much, where they sort of just maybe saw it as a waste of time, if you will, just drawing and not focusing on your studies. Again, that's sort of just my interpretation of why the scene was interjected here in this while these sort of art pictures were interjected here in the scene. Of course, we see the test that he took in Walter White's class, where he got an F, where Walter White says, "Ridiculous, apply yourself." And yeah, pretty hilarious scene here. Quite the picture here for sure. I don't know if YouTube is going to be too happy with the sort of innuendo here of the this photo here. Why Walter White likes chemistry. Pretty damn funny here for sure. In respect to Jesse Pinkman's sense of humor, if I have to say so myself. But yeah, it's then, of course, this is then followed by him looking that he drew this picture on the back of a test, which he got an F in, where Walter White says to him, ridiculous, apply yourself. And, kind of a very sort of metaphorical and intentional piece of writing here on that test, where this is then immediately juxtaposed with his friend Combo calling him to buy the rest of his methamphetamine from him. And again, it's sort of, again, I don't want to get into the very nitty gritty of it, but Combo has some, I believe, cousins with rich friends, and they buy the rest of the meth. Jesse's initially saying, if you want, no more handouts. If you want a handout, go to the Salvation Army. And again, it's sort of the sort of grand irony here, where Walter White writes them in high school that ridiculous, apply yourself, and Jesse sort of is applying himself here by selling off the rest of the methamphetamine, but not in the traditional sense that I think Walter White was talking about back in high school. So just a sort of great scene here, and like I said, and again, my goodness, this scene here when Jesse then goes to Walter White's house to touch base and debrief. My goodness gracious, I love this scene so much. This season 1, so underrated. I mean, I feel like Breaking Bad is a pretty damn critically acclaimed show, but I really feel like season 1 is just, there's so many great scenes in this episode. But yeah, we see Walt getting the money out of the vent after it blew it to the other side. And just unbelievable scene here where Walt is saying, what are you doing here? We're not supposed to, we're done. Like I said, as soon as we're done cleaning up this mess, our paths will never cross. We will never speak ever again, and we will tell this to no one. And of course, Walter White thinking, what are you doing here? Are you wearing a wire? Are you setting me up? And of course, following the back and forth and all of the hilarious sort of lines that are interjected here about Jesse saying we need to touch base and debrief. Jesse basically goes to Walt to proposition him to, cook more methamphetamine, because Jesse is really sort of a, I don't know how you put him here. I kind of view him as sort of a lost soul here, if you will, where, again, I talked about this in the past, where given every opportunity to do something else with his life, Jesse Pinkman just always reverts back to methamphetamine. And again, I don't know what's going on in his head. He had so many opportunities to do something else with his life, but yeah, I mean, I think the money is probably a huge part of it, where he sells off this methamphetamine. He knows that Walter White has this unbelievable talent and skill, and how, like he says, I know people who would just, I believe, quote unquote, give their, left nut for another taste. He says, if you could maybe see your way clear to cooking a little bit more. Well, again, he's propositioning Walter White. He sees the sort of potential for himself in the exact same manner that Saul Goodman, I think, saw when he first realized who Walter White was in that RV in the flashback scene that occurred in season 6 of Better Call Saul, in the episode entitled Breaking Bad. So yeah, it's Paul Sura, that is funny there for sure. Yeah, you'd imagine he was seeing it on the news. That is seeing what was happening to his brother. That's pretty crazy for sure. But yeah, of course, after this proposition here, Walter White completely rejects his overtures, saying, get the hell off my property. I never come back. Jesse Pinkman then sort of saying, $4,000, your share of that batch we cooked. I didn't smoke it all. Him throwing it up in the air and it all landing in the pool very unceremoniously. And, despite, Walter White not wanting to cook methamphetamine anymore, like, again, there's so much going on in Walter White's head here for sure. I think after everything that happened, I think he really doesn't want to cook meth anymore, just based on the fact that everything that's happened and just how it was a total catastrophe and a total disaster when his first attempt. I mean, it's just a great scene here where he then scoops up all of the money out of the pool because he realizes just how bad he needs this money, and how even though he doesn't want to do this anymore, as he sort of said to Jesse Pinkman in the very next season in the episode entitled Bit by Dead Bee, when Jesse says to him, you still want to cook. Even after everything that happened with Tuco, he says to Jesse, what's changed, Jesse? And his circumstances here are exactly the same, where he's kind of back to square one. When he goes to his oncology appointment, he gets the diagnosis from his oncologist, Dr. Del Cavoli, where even if he goes through all this chemotherapy treatment, there's gonna be these horrible side effects that he's gonna have to deal with. That's what he's thinking about right now. And of course, in the very next scene after this, well, of course, it then pans to Jesse's family first. But again, I'll sort of do this a little bit. I'll sort of do this a little bit backwards, if you will. But again, we see him go to his oncology appointment. We see him hear all of the just unbelievable potential side effects of him going through this radiation treatment. And of course, this is then juxtaposed by the scene I talked about a little bit earlier, where as he says to Skylar, where Skylar says, all right, we're going to start the treatment, right? We're just going to go about this. He says to her, $90,000 out of pocket, that's just the start. And then, we're going to take on all this debt just so I can die anyway. I'm not going to leave you with all of this debt. And of course, at the same time, Walter Jr. then says, then why don't you just effing die already? Walter Jr.'s sort of story sort of coming full circle here. And again, before I sort of get into that, we then sort of see this scene here as well, where Jesse sort of takes the hit for Jake Pinkman here in this scene where they find the joint in, I believe it was in Jesse's room, if I'm not mistaken, that he was sleeping in. Maybe it was in Jake's. Yeah, we see him sort of take the hit here for Jake Pinkman. So, actually, excuse me for one. I have to step away for 1 second. Excuse me. I will finish up this episode in just 1 second. I apologize. I have to step away for 1 second here. We're back here. Yeah, sorry. Apologize about that. But yeah, I had to had to take care of something really quick. But yeah, so again, we see the scene here of Jesse basically taking the hit for Jake. Again, the family sort of story is sort of intertwined back and forth here, where again, a couple premises here. I think Jesse definitely takes the hit for Jake because he doesn't want. I mean, his parents effectively already have given up on him, and he doesn't want, Jake to go down that path as well. I suppose he doesn't want his parents to sort of dislike Jake in any way imaginable. They sort of see Jake as a sort of perfect figure. Again, I'm not sure what the sort of how do I put this? Like again, we don't know what's going on in all of these characters' heads, but yeah, again, it was kind of an interesting sort of a premise where, like I said, I think a lot of people were even taken aback by the fact that Jake was even using marijuana. It would kind of make sense in hindsight where he's a very mature person, I feel, when he's dealing with these very mature topics. And for him, he's listed as 14, but he definitely doesn't look 14 here after when Jesse's parents effectively kick him out of his house after this last chance, where he's listed as 14. I think the actor was maybe around 12 years old during this role, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, kind of an interesting scene here where Jake was sort of using marijuana. And again, in hindsight, probably, that's a whole nother sort of tangent with marijuana here in this scene with this whole, and again, it's kind of ironic, the whole sort of gateway drug premise that was brought up in the previous episode when Hank took Walt Jr. to meet Wendy. But yeah, it's again, it's kind of an interesting scene here for sure with Jake using marijuana. And in the grand scheme of things, of course, marijuana is, no more harmful and probably less harmful than a lot of legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco. But at the same time, using it at 12 years old, 14 years old, probably a little bit too young if we're being completely honest. Again, I'm no expert, but I definitely have. I mean, you probably don't want to be doing this stuff when you're a child, no more than you want to be drinking or smoking cigarettes when you're a child. But yeah, Richie MC, maybe it was oregano. Oh my goodness, that would be funny if someone sold him oregano and he thought it was marijuana. So yeah, kind of an interesting scene here. A lot of sort of dynamics here. Again, we don't know what's going on in Jake's head about. Again, I don't want to sort of. I could sort of try to espouse, is that the right word, like why Jake is using marijuana because of stress or et cetera, or curiosity. But again, we don't know. But yeah, a lot of sort of themes here for sure. And a lot of things we'll just never know. I could go off on entire tangents about it, I suppose, but that's sort of a discussion for, I feel like, another video. But yeah, just kind of an interesting scene here where Jesse takes the fall for Jake, destroys the cigarettes, saying it's skunk weed anyway, and thus ending the story of Jake Pinkman. I almost want to say Jake Paul, but of of Jake Pinkman in the plot of Breaking Bad. But yeah, a lot of food for thought here. And again, the whole weed sort of tangent. I mean, I don't exactly know why the at point blank. No, we never saw Jake Pinkman ever again after this scene. This was the one scene that we ever saw of him. But that just Dan, man, that is funny. That is pretty funny there. So but yeah, that's a whole, like I said, it's a whole another tangent about, again, I really feel like the marijuana is neither here nor there. Maybe just trying to, again, maybe just sort of racking my brain. It was to try to just sort of demystify his character a little bit, where, yes, his parents probably revered him and thought of him as this perfect child. I definitely don't think that, was Jesse really the one to influence this marijuana use? Probably not. I mean, Jesse probably would never bring it up with his brother and had nothing to do with this, and it was probably just something that Jake wanted to, was curious about on his own. But yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I feel like it's more just about the juxtaposition of Jake Pinkman, Jesse Pinkman, that I talked about a little bit earlier in the stream, and that's sort of just sort of my reading of his character in this episode. So yeah, and like I talked about a little bit earlier about how Walter White just doesn't want to go through with this treatment out of fears that it's going to incapacitate him, as we saw at Dr. Del Cavoli's office. And he, again, to sort of go back to sort of main premise of this, of Walter White in this series, I mean, he definitely didn't want to tell his family about his lung cancer diagnosis, and he only did because he had to, because he essentially would have, Skyler would have been way too suspicious and he would have lost his family. It was the only way to justify his actions over the last month. And now he's dealing with all of these consequences of this of his actions here in this episode, and we just really see with him dealing with everything he didn't want to deal with. And again, I'm kind of thinking back to that episode entitled Fly, when he's trying to figure out when he should have died, when he had the right amount of money. And while everything kind of blew up in his face, I really feel like I really feel like he was flying by the seat of his pants and really didn't have an initial plan with all of this. But I mean, maybe in his head he wanted to somehow just make all of this money without his wife knowing in these last few final years of his life while having cancer, and maybe just leave them the money somehow and them stumbling upon it. But again, he would never know what would happen with that money, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about the episode entitled Granite State, when Walt is getting the chemo treatment from Ed the Disappearer, and he says, one of these days you're going to come back here, and I'm going to be dead. My money, will you give it to my family? And Ed even says to Walt, if I said yes, would you believe me? So, I mean, Walt can never really know for certain that, even whatever plan he had, that if he somehow cooked this meth and made this money and left it to his family, that his family would even be taken care of. Again, it's sort of a weird sort of dichotomy where that's what he wanted to do, but he could never fully know, I suppose. And he would eventually have to somehow get Skyler in the loop, as opposed to just hiding this money in the house or something to that effect. But yeah, kind of again, a lot of sort of food for thought here. And, the story really ebbs and flows over the course of this, series. And again, we don't know. Again, I'm just speculating. I'm trying to figure out what the right answer is, but at the end of the day, we don't know what was going on in Walter White's head with all of this. So yeah, just a lot of food for thought. And he ends up having to go through the chemotherapy treatment, of course, at the in over the course of the next episode. But again, the sort of grand irony in all of that is that Walter White dies in less than 2 years following his cancer diagnosis, and at the same time, of course, the chemotherapy did cause his remission, so I guess it did sort of do its premise. But I mean, it's sort of funny in the grand irony of it. While the cancer didn't really kill him, he still sort of died anyway in those 2 years. So just again, a lot of food for thought here. I feel like I could go on and on and on here. And again, the big problem is we just don't know what's going on in these characters' heads at the time. But yeah, just a really great episode here with the sort of theme of family. And of course, with following Walter White now wanting to get this treatment, he then is driving and he's coughing up blood. And he finally gets his opportunity to take it out on Ken, where he very serendipitously, pulls over when Ken pulls into this gas station right across the road. He goes into the gas station. To at least, I don't know, to buy a drink or something to that effect or pay for his gas. You would imagine he would just use a credit card. But following him going in here, Walt uses this opportunity to place the squeegee on top of the car battery and set the car on fire. I believe that's how he did it. And then we see the car blow up as he walks away in the distance and him drive away quite satisfied here with what he did. And again, really sort of just juxtaposing the dichotomy of Walter White at the beginning of this episode to the end of this episode, where, again, like I said, he really couldn't do anything in the bank. But in my opinion of the scene and the sort of grand overarching premise of all of this, really badass scene at Almeida's Army, I agree. But yeah, kind of just, it really just sort of makes you think about how people in Walter White's situation really just have absolutely nothing to lose. They really don't. And even if he got caught here, in his mind, he's like, I'm going to be dead in less than 2 years anyway. And so, this guy really affronted me and insulted me and just affronted my sort of ego and my entire person. So, screw this guy. I'm going to take it out on this guy. Like I said, the universe is unfair. This guy is doing well. He's not. He's a jerk. I play by the rules. Where did that get me? I'm gonna take him down a peg. So a little bit sort of akin to Howard Hamlin's sort of speech in the episode entitled "Plan and Execution." How we have so much, we have so little. Let's take him down a peg. So yeah, a lot of sort of just food for thought here in respect to Walter White's actions over the course of this episode, where we really get to see a lot of the family dynamic. We really get to see a lot of a person who really has nothing to lose anymore. The sort of actions that they take, and he never would have done this without the cancer diagnosis. Likely, he never would have affronted Ken. He likely would have just eaten the fact this guy stole his parking spot. He would have been maybe mad about it. He would have not put this. He would have not blown his car up as he did at the end of this episode. So at Stone Yoda, Ken loses. So yeah, Ken definitely gets the better of him twice. And I guess the premise here of the cosmic justice, if you will, where while Ken is maybe not the most, morally upstanding person, I guess that's sort of the way they're painting him. The universe still sort of got one over on him a couple times where, a couple 4 years prior to this, maybe 4 or 5 years prior to this, he had been scammed out of a couple $1,000s when Giselle and Victor pretended to be clients who were going to invest millions of dollars with him, and now his car is destroyed. Honestly, I think the Victor and Giselle scam is probably way worse. You would imagine the insurance would cover this. You would imagine. I mean, it was clearly arson. I mean, they would find the squeegee in there, I feel. So you would imagine Ken had pretty good insurance. So I don't think the car would have been a total loss unless he had a very bad coverage like Frank Costanza and Seinfeld. But so. Yeah, Ken's sequel series. Let's get it done at Bube Washer of Esserham. That would be hilarious. I know it's never gonna happen, but that would be pretty damn hilarious for sure. So yeah, Ken, the universe sort of gets the better of Ken a couple of times, and that concludes the episode here, Cancer Man. And yeah, I mean, really great episode. Like I talked about when I was watching this show back in 2012, I was absolutely hooked. At Stone Yo, he needs a tequila topper after this one. I agree. That is a great callback there for sure. But just like I said, a lot of great metaphors here of character development, the sort of growth and decay of and transformation, as Walter White said in the very first episode of the series. We really see the sort of family dynamic continue to develop between Walter White and his brother-in-law and his sister-in-law and his son and wife. We get a huge glimpse into Jesse Pinkman's backstory, which again, really illuminating, in my opinion, when we really have to sort of comprehend the entire story of Jesse Pinkman in this series when we look at the full story of who this character was. And I definitely don't think it's meaningless, where he came from and the upbringing that it appears that he had. Again, we don't know his upbringing. I would imagine it was the same as Jake Pinkman, but we don't know. We don't know for 100% sure. But yeah, just unbelievable episode here. One of my favorites. I mean, that scene of Walt when Walt sees Jesse for the first time since they cleaned up that mess, and they're going about their separate lives. And like Walt said, maybe he really believed he would never see Jesse Pinkman ever again. Where he looks through his peephole through his door and says, "You cannot be serious." When Jesse Pinkman is there, it's an unbelievably hilarious scene. I think I've just rewatched that scene again and again in the past. So. Yeah, at Stone Yoda. Good luck tomorrow, man. Good luck tomorrow for sure, man. I mean, I'm not really a gambler, but to each their own. And I hope you, yeah, I heard it's a great, it can be a fun place. That is for sure. So, but yeah, like I said, a great sort of glimpse into Jesse Pinkman's backstory. I really do think where he came from matters, even though we don't know for sure. Kind of an interesting glimpse into his parents as well. That's a whole nother tangent, but yeah, it's a pretty interesting. Yeah, that as an interesting point as well at Richie MC, the his Aunt Ginny. We don't know too much about her role in raising him. We know that he took care of her when she had cancer. We learned that over the course of this season and the next, but we don't really. Again, we don't really know about Jesse Pinkman's upbringing. We don't know. Again, it was never revealed to us whether or not his Aunt Jenny really had any role in raising him or what relationship that she had with the rest of her family. We know that Jesse took care of her. Again, really sort of, you know, I think it's a very sort of good aspect that's written into Jesse Pinkman's character. This sort of, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Empathetic, nurturing character that he was when he was taking care of his aunt. So yeah, it was that's an interesting component of the story. And again, more questions than answers though at Richie MC. At Just Dan, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for all the support you've given to this channel. So is that I see that's Kobe on your picture there. I don't know who the is that LeBron is the other player. I'm not so sure, but really appreciate the support there for sure. What happens in Vegas? Yeah, yeah, it's the house always wins, so they say. So, but yeah, it's a fun place, and I know why people go there for sure. So, but yeah, at Richie MC, a lot more questions than answers in respect to Jesse Pinkman's upbringing. And at the end of the day, I know I've kind of gotten on my high horse here again and again with Jesse Pinkman, but as Ed the Superior even said to him, you and your partner made your own luck, to sort of use a Vegas reference, if you will. And, as did your lawyer, as did your partner. So, Jesse Pinkman, he made his decisions. He had to live with them. And, this story really, again, the backstory of Jesse Pinkman and the story that was crafted of his character was just truly unbelievable. And like I said, I really feel like it would have been much more of a tragic parable had he not made it through in the end. But I don't know. At the same time, I'm still talking about him, and I feel like I'm not talking about Nacho Varga as much. But that truly was. I mean, this Nacho Varga story was truly a tragic parable, through and through, in my opinion. Just the story of Nacho Varga, just filled with just absolute tragedy in so many respects. And of all the characters in Better Call Saul, I really feel like Nacho even gets the least, and Nacho's father really gets the least amount of closure compared to every other character. I mean, terrible what happened to Howard Hamlin, but he gets some semblance of closure at the end. In the end of the day, I mean, with Nacho and Nacho's father and that scene that happened with Mike in Fun and Games, I mean, just unbelievably tragic scene that happened there, and just an unbelievably tragic story that is Nacho Varga. And I've often thought about just the comparison of his character to Jesse Pinkman. So, yeah, a lot of food for thought. And like I said, I absolutely love this series. Can't get enough of it, and we'll see what happens. I mean, in the who knows, maybe in a decade from now we'll get more of it, and we'll get more iterations of this universe. If I'm really desperate, I guess I could watch Slippin' Jimmy. I don't technically know if that is canon. I don't know how that works. I know like Star Wars has like the Clone Wars, but then again, people say that canon doesn't exist anymore, and Disney just contradicts Star Wars left and right, just to make money and put out films. But yeah, just a lot of food for thought, and we'll see what happens here in the future with this universe. Who knows? Who knows what comes of all of this? But can't wait to see, and can't wait to continue talking about this unbelievable first season of Breaking Bad as well. The next episode, Gray Matter, like I talked about a little bit earlier, we finally get to break down the sort of Deus Ex Machina of the all of Walt's problems being solved with this essential blank check that he's offered to be given to him by his former business partner Elliot. We get to see a little bit of a glimpse into Jesse Pinkman and what he does following Walter White rejecting his overtures. Unbelievable sort of episode that happens between him and Badger. We get to see that unbelievable talking pillow scene, which is a I think, very polarizing of a scene for sure. That I'll get into in the next stream of this review, if you will, of the first season. And I look forward to talking about it in the future. So with that, I think I will end this here. But yeah, I really appreciate really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. Like I said, there are not enough hours in the day, and the fact that you took time to watch this stream, I really appreciate all the support. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate all the super chats as well. Thank you again so much for everyone who supported this channel. Again, really appreciate, like I said, even if you're watching this video as well now or after the fact, I really appreciate that as well. That support really helps as well. So yeah, again, really appreciate the chat. I love hearing people's perspective about this show. I can never talk enough about it. I really can't. But yeah, at Morbid, interesting name there. Yeah, really appreciate, like I said, really appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm not so sure about when the next stream will be. No streams last week. My schedule really sort of got away from me. It was a pretty crazy week for me last week. But yeah, these will happen whenever I can. I'll try to post in the community tab before I do them. And yeah, really looking forward to continuing talking about this show and whatever other news comes out about this universe. Also talking about trying to talk about other shows. That's sort of a whole nother thing. Trying to tip my toes into other shows as well. We'll kind of see how that goes. But yeah, for everyone in the United States, have a great rest of your evening. It's almost over on the East Coast, and have a great day tomorrow. Weekend's almost here, and have a great rest of your week. I'll see you guys around. Thank you again so much for tuning in tonight. Take it easy.